All right, good morning, everybody. If you want to start making your way in here for adult class, we will begin in just a minute. Morning. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started here with our Sunday morning class. We've been looking at these topics, and I've been kind of presenting them in the way of these are the don't press the button issues within the modern realm of Christianity, maybe even the church culture we've grown up in, or American church, if you want to put it that way. But these are the things that are thou shalt nots. That's kind of the quick and simple, dirty answer, right? And the problem and the tough part about just saying a yes or a no or a thou shalt not is we don't really know the reason why. So when I started this, I brought the big red button, and when you say don't press the big red button, people want to press the big red button, right? And so not necessarily these topics that we're talking about am I going to say that they are good or they're bad or either direction. That's why we have the discussion time. It's just kind of informing ourselves why we might want to have an opinion on them or why we might not or why we need to be neutral. So we've got the chance to talk about drinking and gambling. Am I missing one that we already talked about here? I think so. Dancing, thank you. Yeah, drinking, dancing, gambling, all those fun things. Got a chance to talk about those already a little bit. And last week I spun the roulette wheel to find the next one because we're talking about gambling. And it landed on drugs twice, but Kim was like, I want to be here for drugs. So Kim likes drugs. You can tell her I said that. So I spun it again, and we landed on swimming. And I was kind of like, oh, great. What do we have to talk about swimming? Swimming's kind of seems like a weird thing to talk about in a Bible class, right? Especially if you've never been in some sort of churches, you'd be like, why in the world would we ever talk about that? So when it comes to Christian life and swimming, why have you heard / why do you think this might be something that matters to some, more to others than others? All right, I already got bunches of hands up. Renee, did you have one? We'll go with you first. Bathing suits, absolutely. That's probably where we're going to hang out most today. Terry?
First time that I had ever.
I have some follow-up questions. So, who got the precedence over the pool? He did because he was the guest?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. As a teenager, am I right on teenager? As a teenager, they had a pool at their house, and some college kids from Abilene Christian University came up, and basically she had to get out of the pool because there was a college guy swimming in the pool, and it was mixed swimming, which is where most people are going to hang out on this stuff. Mixed swimming. And I'll define that here in a second because that sounds completely crazy. I understand. Sandra? Absolutely, Sandra. I was complimenting you, not trying to be creepy. Okay, Courtney. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Let's take legalism all the way. Nope, he's drowning. He's a boy. I'm a girl. Nancy? Yeah.
That was never, it was, they just paid it.
Well, here's the thing. Most of these topics we're talking about are usually rooted in somebody's personal understanding or maybe more likely opinion, right? And so every single one of these topics, I don't think it'd be appropriate for the church to have a stance on, like exclusively. Like if we made a doctrine, we're starting to get into some religious dogma there, right? But the kind of the question or the phrase that has been used historically within the churches of Christ, but not Nancy's, blessed for that, right? Is this idea of mixed swimming. And as a kid, I had never heard that either, Terry, so we're in the same page there. And I'm like, mixed bathing, right. It's not mixed swimming, it's mixed bathing. We've made it more King James, please, right? So mixed bathing, what is mixed bathing? Well, basically it's a simple idea of swimming men and women together, right? It's not typically used, although it definitely, by definition, could be used in taking a full-on bath, but it's not typically used that way. It's used in the course of swimming, right? So mixed bathing is literally going to any pool where there's anyone else that's in, right? That's the mixed part. It's not about race, it's about gender, and it just kind of sounds weird. It kind of flows off the tongue kind of weird and gooey. So that's the phrasing that's used. If you look something up, you want to see the argument for why you shouldn't swim with guys and girls, look up mixed bathing Christians, right? That's what you'll find, okay? So if we're talking about swimming with men and women in the same pool, the issue that's usually brought up that is where people stand their ground is kind of what we've got a couple different answers on, but it's kind of like the modesty issue again, right? And we got to talk about modesty a little while back, but why would modesty be an issue when it comes to mixed bathing, to swimming? Okay. Oh, wow, that's a full slant. I didn't. Okay.
Well, I was told
So swimming gets you to dancing?
almost there.
All right. Wow. What's that, Jen? Yeah, okay. So we've got, I didn't even think about, okay. So you're in close quarters. That could be if you have the wrong heart about you and the wrong mindset. I guess that could be problematic. Mostly the one that people hang out in. Courtney, did you have? But mostly the one people hang out in is scantily clothed when you're swimming, right? I mean, practicality reasons, it doesn't make sense to wear a winter jacket and snow boots and pants to go swimming in. And something in between is not quite practical either, so we kind of swing the complete opposite direction and we have the least amount of clothing we can. I am sad that JD's not here because JD has actual information about this, being a swim coach for years and years and years. But you know, even guys, not in our culture quite as much, but even guys have some pretty scantily limited clothing when it comes to swimming, right? Not just a girls thing. Some of the ladies are like, yeah, I've been there, seen that. Not sure I wanted to. As a guy, I'm not sure I wanted to see another guy. We'll get into a story about that in a minute. Courtney.
Right?
Yeah. Fun things like that.
Baywatch, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're like,
Some people might. Some people might. I don't know. So a big part of this, and I'll get to you here next, Nancy, and we talked about this one, especially when it came to head coverings, but culture plays a ginormous part in any of these discussions, right? Talked about it on drinking a little bit as well. We live in a culture where we can have safe water to drink, so it's not like we're required to be drinking alcohol. But when it comes to like swimming, you look at our culture, and we all have the first one that comes to mind is like bikinis, right? Bikinis are what we would say is the scantily clad clothing of swimming. Sure,
Go
that's
back on the
perfect.
Greek. Oh,
Yep,
so I'm
right now. But that's good to remember too, because culture changes, right? It changes with time, and I'm saying this slice of culture right now. So we have our culture now that is, clothed to some degree. You go in the history, it's clothed a lot from our perspective. And you go to other cultures, such as Japanese culture, where public bathhouses where actual baths are taken are normal, but they're not mixed. Then you have, kind of something else we would be, as Americans, uncomfortable with. It's pretty funny to hear people's stories of going to Japan and being uncomfortable with that because we're not used to swimming naked. And so people hang out in the modesty argument a lot. I don't know if any of the scriptures on this exactly prove a point either direction, but people like to go and head back to Genesis chapter 3, verses 7 and 10. This is Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And when they have more knowledge of good and evil now because they have taken from the tree they were not supposed to, what is something they do? They cover themselves because they were ashamed. And I know the mind movies like they had some fig leaves or whatever, but the scripture says they covered themselves because they were ashamed. So some people like to hang out on that and say, well, obviously it's shameful to not be covered. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. They were hiding from God with covering, so that's kind of interesting. They were hiding from God in multiple. But people like to go hang out in this modesty argument. What have you heard on the modesty argument in our modern culture? I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one. Okay. Huh. So that's here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a lot of summer camp things kind of apply here. If you go to camps, typically they have to make a rule just across the board so they don't have to deal with it every other day, right? And so, like my Bible camp growing up, I wouldn't consider strict in most things, but yet the rule is still no shorts. Just that's easy to say no shorts. Then we don't have to police a length of shorts, or if guys are wearing pixie, crazy dudes, whatever. That happens. Don't laugh, guys. All right. So, what else have you seen from some modesty in swimming? Courtney, go for it.
Bible.
Yeah. So because of our context, we have a couple in mind. It's basically bikinis and speedos, right? That's kind of our modern culture of what would be on the edge of immodest, depending on your body type and your situation, right? But what's that? It could just be gross, yes. But that's not necessarily. Sometimes, well, we'll go that way for a second. Sometimes it doesn't, it makes you not lust. And then the other direction is maybe it's draw attention towards lust. Okay, I'm not going to say, I have some more comments on that in a second. But lust is kind of the hangout word that people like to hang out on modesty and this sort of thing. So what would lust be in the context of swimming? Go for it. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
if you know, and it's not, disgusting's over
Right.
because it's just gross now.
I wasn't going to talk about that, but you did take us the other direction. That's completely true. And it doesn't necessarily have to be good looking versus bad looking. Based on your context, too, sometimes, hopefully, your mind doesn't always go that direction. And hopefully, we can guard our hearts beyond that. But here's a little story. When I was in high school, my little cousins grew up their entire life in Sicily, Italy. I mean, they left when they were like 3, 2, and 1 or something like that, right? I grew up my whole life northeast Montana. So there's some cultural differences there, even though they're from Montana. But they grew up in Sicily, Italy. So we go to the water park when they're around one summer over in Williston, North Dakota. And, no big deal. We're going to go ride the flow rider and ride the slides and all that stuff. And they walk out in the smallest bathing suits I have ever seen on a small child. All 3 of them, ages 6, 7, and 8, in the teeniest little Speedos. And we laughed very, very hard, but it wasn't a lust thing, thank goodness. That would be very bad, right? That would be very wrong. But we had never even crossed our mind that culturally, we were kind of the weird ones to them. Because culturally, this is what they wore every summer they went to the pool. This is what everybody wore every summer going to the pool. But at the same time, we have the other side of it. If a man sees a scantily clad woman because she's wearing a bikini and he's not guarding his heart, it's an easy trap to fall into, starting to desire someone sexually, right? And I like that Nancy went the other direction too, because oftentimes we give girls the bad rap, but guys can be attractive, right? Guys can be attractive in a swimsuit too. I mean, just think of culture. You guys went with Baywatch. That plays on both sides of it, doesn't it? Got attractive men and attractive women because that's what they're making media to sell you, right? But Nancy also said it doesn't necessarily matter if you're wearing clothes or not, or a surplus or a lack thereof, right? If you have a lustful desire in your heart to look at someone sexually, let your mind run away and then your heart be contaminated with that, you could do that in any situation, couldn't you? Courtney?
I'll be showing them because the lust after your little Africa. Yours are very test out, but
And say that you look at African culture, and the whole top half's like no big deal, right? Be out all the time. Just completely crazy for Americans. We're like, wait a minute, no, that's weird. That's weird. So we want to guard ourselves against lust. Romans 13:13, Paul says to the Roman church, let us walk properly as if we're in the daytime, not in orgies or drunkenness, nor sexual immorality and sensuality, not quarreling and in jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. If you looked at that in the King James, it actually uses the word lusts. That's where people like to use the word lust in connection there. But as Christians, what is one call that we are to have? I mean, Paul lays it out right there. He gives a list, and then he gives what the Christian should be. What's the call that we should be doing? Yeah, be changed about how we behave, right? It's like yeah, you have the opportunity, as Paul's list here is orgies, drunkenness, sexual immorality, sensuality, or lust. That's the word that's used there. Quarreling and jealousy. That's kind of a good list of lots of things we struggle with. And yet, Paul is saying because you're a Christian, you should focus on the Lord Jesus Christ, not the flesh, not the desires of the flesh, but the desires of the Lord.
Where,
Every day.
yay, off limits. Never allowed. Right.
Make a thou shalt not out of something that needs to be decided in your own heart. Um, and I hate to go back to this one. We really do this with drinking, really, really hard. Okay, and I sound like a liberal fruitcake every time I say it, but it's drinking is not. You cannot make a law on a glass of wine. You really can't. You have to make a law on the heart of being drunk or the heart of trying to escape and drunkenness. You got to focus on that. And I think the same thing comes to mixed bathing, swimming, right? You cannot legislate the heart. It has to be from within. Courtney, did you have a comment? Go for it.
There is something kind of like, I'm a rebel, you know. So all their body parts. Hurt? Probably shouldn't be.
I agree with that. And you're going to have a conversation with Kevin after class now. Or you- Kidding. So it comes down to the heart matter, right? And I kind of a question I had for Terry, because you have had this situation. A lot of us haven't, because we live in Wyoming. We don't have that many swimming opportunities. When we do, much more natural than the backyard pool. Were you allowed to stay around the pool, or you had to go? So it, yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah. Very, very interesting. Okay, that was my question too. Is like because if we're trying to legalize it and legislate it, maybe you'd have to absolutely leave before they left the dressing room, type of thing, basically, right? So I was just gonna, okay, I was just Larry. Oh, no. Larry, there's a very proper baptism attire, don't you know? Paul said, "Repent and be baptized." No, I'm kidding. In a gown from head to toe. It is kind of interesting, though. If you look at, we even have this creeping into our grouping. Sometimes, if you go someplace a little more formal, there is a formal baptism gown, right?
yes.
We see that in denominations, but we also see that within just the Christian church. And it's just kind of like a hospital gown, but the back's closed type of thing, right? And it's like, okay, that's interesting. But then you come to it from a more organic standpoint, which is typically where we're at of, hey, I got a call, let's go down to the river. And the proper baptism attire is whatever you can wear, right? I have never had anybody, I have been nervous about that before because, especially in the internet times, right? People will just they'll find this baptism video that's so great and glorious and somebody giving their life to Christ, and then they'll just decide to make lots of little nitpicky comments because it's on the internet, right? And I've had that happen multiple times before, and so I do get nervous about what are people wearing? Is somebody going to say anything like it matters, right? And so that's a Harold problem, that Harold's worried about what people on the internet are going to say rather than just rejoicing the entire time with this person. And so, personally, I've seen people and been a part of baptisms where some people may say it's immodest apparel. But I don't think that was the point at the time, was it? Well, that's great. That's great. It's just, that's interesting that people can hang out in there. So what I think it really, really boils down to is, it's interesting because it's not even necessarily swimming. It's not necessarily the bathing, like you said. It's not necessarily nakedness, as Courtney kind of pointed out, but it goes, again, touching base on this modesty issue, which we've talked about before. And modesty's in the scripture. Do you guys kind of remember how we talked about modesty in 1 Timothy, 1 Corinthians? You know, those are warnings against or adorning yourselves in ways to gather and get noticed attention, right? So the language that's used there is braiding of hair and putting on jewelry and stuff that we won't even talk about as modesty today because, like, whatever, put on jewelry, braid your hair, who cares? But at the same time, we historically, as the church, have taken those scriptures and made them say, well, you need to wear the proper amount and the right kind of clothing. But rather, the opposite side is kind of the point that Paul was getting to when he was writing to Timothy and to Corinth church about don't try and draw attention to yourself. So we've kind of swung, this happens often, we kind of swung so far one way, we now are missing the point on this direction, right? So obviously, when you go swimming, you don't want to draw attention to yourselves. Well, maybe you do. That would be a heart problem on your side, right? And no, you laugh at that, but there is people that try and draw attention to themselves in their bathing suit. No doubt. Courtney talked about beach culture. Beach culture is very focused on vanity. Look at me. Look how good I look today, right? And that can be not just what you're wearing, but how you're treating yourself as well. Nancy? Probably. Yeah, to some degree. And I think this is something that some people wrestle with more than others, but again, that's their heart issue, right? Their heart issue is I'm trying to get people to look at me, whether look at me because I can show off my assets, for a lack of better words, or look at me because of the fancy clothing I bought. Either direction is the same heart problem. Yeah, we kind of started to touch on that a little bit, didn't we? But yeah, we can do that in any aspect of our lives, whether you're at the swimming pool or not, right? One way that you can even do it to this very day, Courtney and I were talking about this the other day, is who in here uses an iPhone? Give me a hand. I don't use it. Tricked you. iPhone specifically makes their phone so that if an Android texts you, it's a worse experience. And if you text an Android, they know you're an iPhone. Why do they do that? Well, it's because they want you to show your superiority. If my videos that I get from Courtney's dad just look like a potato filmed them, that's what they look like because it's iPhone to Android. I'm like, man, really get an iPhone so I can look at these videos. Or if my text is green to them because I'm not cool enough to be blue, it's like, man, it's like, look at me, look at what I have, the iPhone, right? So we do that in so many even little teeny pieces of our culture, right? Renee? Mm-hmm.
Way I got
You're practicing. Yes. So Renee is practicing modesty when it comes to video sending. on Facebook. See, it was like kind of a rabbit trail. So we have the hard issue of trying to show off and trying to be greater and show what you have or what you don't have, or it can go both ways, right? Because minimalism can be a show off as well. But then there's the other heart involved in this story. So we've talked about, let's say you're wearing a bikini to be seen. The other heart we've talked about a little bit too. There is a possibility someone might lust after you. Man or woman, we've shared that can happen in our culture. Somebody could lust over you because you are wanting to be seen in that way. Courtney?
Are we-
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there's
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the reason I won't buy Old Navy pants. You know that. Like, it's inappropriate. I don't know who they designed those pants for, but not men, right? Nancy?
There are some. Anyways.
Our American culture.
But most men wear the swimming trunks. So
Yeah.
From here,
Right.
right. Very. Women. Hey, the goes to. So if a woman.
Well, and there's, again, we're kind of digging into the American slice of this definition, the American current culture. I'll even go that far of this slice. And I would say the double standard is always true, isn't it? There's never one absolute answer, even within culture. And you're right, the double standard for men is completely modest. Nothing sexual, if you will, about a normal pair of swim trunks for a man. Now, where is that line for women? I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to attempt this. But there's definitely something in the two-piece category where it's too far or okay, right? Like there's an option there someplace. Now, I don't have daughters yet, so catch me in 15 years or something, okay? But it's interesting to think about it. So we have the hard issue of what you're wearing to see to be seen. And then we also have the hard issue of I want to look at something because that sounds fun. And some people are kind of sometimes ignorant to both of these. You know, some people don't even realize. I went swimming with a friend, a man friend in high school, and we went to the same water park just to have fun. And he said something like, "Man, why do all these girls have to wear bikinis?" And I was like, I hadn't even thought about that, right? But he was wrestling with that in his heart at that very moment, and he let me know that. He was wrestling with that. I was kind of oblivious because I wasn't wrestling with that. Did we have Terry or Courtney before I go back to Nancy?
like that. All the way.
Find them in your store.
Oh,
And I'm not telling you what to wear, either direction.
Days and
I'm going to go, Terry, and I'll come back to you, okay?
That could be problem is
Again, going back to the heart issues, is like you can't control somebody else's thoughts, right? You can only control what you do, and if you feel like modesty is something that you need to be one direction, you kind of have to define that for yourself. Absolutely. You definitely need to define that for yourself. Unless you have a father or mother who's defining it for you. That's important, right? That's important. Nancy. Okay. I knew we'd get to hang out on this for a second.
A two-piece swimsuit.
I like how there's like 5 people like, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad we're standing on that ground. Right. Where do I go from that? All right. So, on any of these topics, I think it would be extremely challenging, and I think we're blessed to be in a congregation where we can just talk about these things, and our kids can hear why we, even as adults, wrestle with some of the answers to these things and how it's not just a yes or no or a this line or that line, and especially when it comes to things like modesty, when it comes to lust, because lust can be like Terry was saying, it doesn't just have to be sexual. That's usually where we go, but it can be desiring over other things, like cars, houses, watches, iPhones, whatever it might be. And it could definitely be our bodies, how we see each other. So I think we're blessed to be in the congregation. It would be very challenging to be someplace where there was a rule, right? Because not necessarily is the rule bad, but the discussion needs to be connected to the rule. The why and the how we enact it always needs to be connected to most of these topics. Most of these topics are just Renee. Yeah. And see, yeah. See, and that is tough too. Explaining things to kids is a whirlwind. So, and again, parenting is one of those things that I'm a novice at because I just get to borrow with people's children for small minutes and then return them. Really great. But as you raise your children and as you parent, you want to explain these things so that when they reach their independence, they don't just go, well, I never could, so now I should, right? Or even the opposite way, I always could, so maybe I shouldn't. We see that happen sometimes too. But explaining it and explaining how you're thinking as a parent, even though it's tough, like you were saying, explaining that to a 6-year-old is tough, can be really, really helpful later in life because now they kind of know where you were coming from. And when they're in college, they could be like, do I really want all the sleazy boys to look at me? Or do I want to be kind of right there in the middle so I can make some of the decision on who I want to talk to, whatever it might be, right? So that being said, any final comments on swimming, mixed bathing? Well, I'm not going to tell. There's no answers. No answers in the forum. Forums do not come with answers. That's the rules. It's definitely an interesting topic, right? And it's like, you saw me pull 2 or 3 scriptures, but it's not really one. You can just go to the Bible and find the verse of, thou shalt only have a bikini so big and so wide and whatever. It's not there. It's not there. Nancy. Yes.
And their focus is, they're not.
Yeah.
It's up to people or just.
And that's, again, looking at the heart. And even though we think that we are sly, I guess you could say, most of the time people can tell if you're there for the wrong heart motive, right? Like, yeah. Like, yeah.
They're not there to go swimming.
We'll go back to the drinking one now, I guess. Anyway. But yeah, it's like you can usually tell even though people think they're covering your eyes, right? All right, so that's the swimming topic. Again, it was kind of a weird one, but it came up in the roulette wheel. So we will talk about drugs next week since Kim's back and she loves drugs and she wants to talk about them. You can tell her I said that, like I said. But that being said, talking about swimming, Courtney and I love to go to the hot spring, Thermopolis. We do that a lot. Many people in this church have been to the hot springs with us because we invite them. It's never been an awkward thing. So that being said, we're going to go to Star Plunge at 4 o'clock this afternoon. If you guys want to join us in Thermopolis and Star Plunge at 4 o'clock, we'll see you there. Wear what you find appropriate. Wear what you find appropriate. I have had to wrestle with that with my little Italian cousins. So anyway, we were like, you should say that as a joke. And then we're like, no, really, we should go. So we're really going to go Star Plunge this afternoon if you guys want to join us. All right, guys, we'll be back here in a few minutes, and we'll be back for assembly. Thank you. I did. Did I miss you? Oh. Oh, there's one back there. You want to grab it?
Good, how are you?